Hello there. What's going on, everyone? Today we're asking, what have I missed during the history of X-Wing, the miniatures game? Maybe you've played a whole lot of time and maybe you missed some time. Maybe you've stopped playing and now you're just coming back. Or maybe you're just starting the game and really curious about a little bit about the history of the waves of the ships and kind of things that have happened during its long lifespan. So we're going to be talking about that today. Also want to thank today's sponsor, Luxury Playstyle. If you haven't already, check out luxuryplaystyle.com. They have amazing full metal tokens, double-sided. They really are going to impress your opponents when you show up at the game table with these tokens. You're going to be able to save 15% by using code Crabbok VIP. And while supplies last, orders of $35 or more are going to get a free Crabbok lightsaber nunchuck token thrown into their order. So definitely check out luxuryplaystyle.com. So really, it all started in 2012. X-Wing, the miniatures game, came out. It was released at Gen Con and had fully painted miniatures, which was very attractive to a lot of folks. Really greatly detailed, and it had the flight path system and came in the core set that you see here with an X-Wing and two miniatures, and it was pretty awesome. Along with this came the launch wave, or what we call Wave 1, which is going to have an X-Wing, a TIE Fighter, the TIE Advanced, and the Y-Wing in there as well. And this is kind of the format that a lot of additional ships would come out in. We would have waves. And so the next wave, Wave 2, was the Millennium Falcon and the Slave 1, which were the first large ships. And then, of course, your TIE Interceptor and A-Wing. The Slave 1 was the first ship that could shoot forward and backwards, and the Millennium Falcon at the time had a 360-degree primary weapon turret. So it could always shoot anywhere, and this was kind of led to it being very, very powerful and pretty dominant in a lot of games for many years. The Millennium Falcon has kind of always been a great ship, but in X-Wing First Edition, or what we're calling this as First Edition, the initial launch of the game, it was very, very strong. Next up, Wave 3 brought us the B-Wing, which is my favorite ship in all of Star Wars, so this was actually my entry point into the game. And also the TIE Bomber, the Lambda Shuttle, and the HWK. Now, the HWK was a pretty nice entry here, being a really nice inclusion from the video games. This was a cool one. Also, the Lambda Shuttle marked the first significantly movable pieces. You know, on your Falcon, you had the little dish that could swivel a little bit, but the wings actually going all the way up and down on that Lambda were pretty significant. Now, this was about the time they started introducing some in-between wave expansions. So we started to get Aces packs introduced around this time, which were just repaints of existing ships, as well as some extra cards for those ships. This was like a nice little supplementary boost to your gameplay product, and this wouldn't be the last of the Aces packs. We would go on to see lots of different Aces packs over the years, and these all were during X-Wing First Edition. This was also around the time they introduced huge ships. We had the GR-75 Rebel Transport, which was the very first huge ship to come out, followed by the Tantive 4, which was delayed a little bit, but came out after that. And then eventually we got Imperial ships like the Imperial Raider and eventually the Gozanti, which all kind of and they were spaced out when these huge ships came out. But this was epic play, and they were awesome. And this just like, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed playing Epic. It was something I used to do a lot more often back in the initial days of X-Wing. These systems had power management, and they had all kinds of, they came with extra ships too. That was another really cool thing about those ships. So then Wave 4 rolled around, and this brought us some more EU ships. This gave us the E-Wing, the Z-95, the TIE Defender, and the TIE Phantom. And I believe this was very close to around the time that we started getting news of Disney buying Lucasfilm. Then we had also the Decimator in Wave 5, and of course the Dash Rendar in the YT 2400, which came out the Outrider expansion. This was a particularly cool wave because it was only two ships, but they were also more expensive because they were large. But this was also around the time that these ships kind of dominated for a while as well. So that was actually pretty cool. cool. Especially Dash. Dash was very, very strong for a long time. Then Wave 6 came around and introduced a whole nother faction. This was the Scum and Villainy wave. This was a pretty significant wave in that it had nothing for the Rebels or the Empire. It was all Scum and Villainy. This, you had your launch core set basically for the Scum, although it wasn't an actual core set, but it did come with additional cardboard to be able to use the Slave 1 for the Empire as a Scum ship, and also be able to use that HWK for the Rebels as a Scum ship. So if you were a Rebel or an Imperial player, you might have an additional ship that could go right into this. Now, with the Scum and Villainy, this led to a lot of future waves having more Scum and Villainy ships than Rebel and Imperial ships to try to get them caught up. But this also led to a fully fleshed out faction that would eventually have its own huge ships to have for epic play, as well as an Aces pack of their own eventually. Wave 7 came out and again did lean a little bit more towards Scum and Villainy, but did also give us some wilder ships from the Empire and the Rebels. Now, these are still, by this point, this is stuff that was kind of still drenched in the EU, or what's now called Legends, but Disney was like, they didn't care, because these deals were already done before that, so they still had to honor that. So X-Wing would still eventually have some Legends ships for a while, although that would not always be the case, especially once The Force Awakens was announced and we got a brand new core set announced for X-Wing. This was actually a pretty interesting time, because when this core set, first off, this was done in secret. This was like supposed to just show up one day, and there was going to be an article that said, hey, why don't you go to your stores today? And this was like right before Episode 7 came out. And go to your stores right now. You might find a surprise. Boom, all new core set. This blew a lot of people's minds, except somebody from Target ended up leaking this. And it showed up, and everybody on the forums and everybody was going crazy about it. And FFG was drastically, like, they were deleting posts and stuff like that just as fast as they could spring up. So the only way you could really talk about this was on some other social media as opposed to FFG's forums. But yeah, so this came out, and it was pretty funny, because this obviously had a big problem in that they hadn't seen the movie yet. So there were a lot of generic pilots. Poe Dameron was only Initiative 8 as opposed to 9, or pilot skill 8 as opposed to 9. But it's just funny. There were a lot of little like things that they guessed at, but they couldn't quite get it right. And this was kind of showed the error in trying to come out with a product before you've actually been able to digest all of the material for it. So that much was very interesting. Moving forward, we had the Ghost Wave, which also had the deployable ship, which was really cool seeing stuff deploy. We saw that with the Gazanti also. But then this also had some extra Episode 7 ships. We had a different version of the T-70 X-Wing. Then this wave came out after, of course, after this was Wave 8. This came out after the movies. And then we had the Punishing One, which would go on to be the most broken ship in all of X-Wing's entire history. Giving an example of a ship that would be nerfed so many times, they actually changed the physical values that were printed on the cards, and that still proved to not be enough. This ship was nerfed into oblivion, to where if you bought this ship like a year or two after it came out, you wouldn't even be able to use the stuff that came in it. I guess they never realized. They thought, when making the ship, that it's asymmetric dial, that it would lead to it being so predictable that people wouldn't want to take it. Turns out people didn't care, and they would just fill the board with Punishing Ones or Jumpmaster 5000s. So that was particularly interesting. Next up, I think, is Wave 9. We had Asajj Ventress and of course Ketsu Onyo in the Shadowcaster, and then we had this was on, like, we were starting to get stuff from Star Wars Rebels was becoming more and more prominent now. We had the TIE SF, a later ship showing up. And also, by the way, during this point in the game, as we were getting First Order and Resistance ships, they were strictly Empire and Rebels. So all of the First Order was in the Empire faction. They were just They called it a sub-faction, but you could totally mix and match Empire and First Order in the same list. Same thing goes with Resistance and the Rebels. You could fly Poe Dameron and Luke Skywalker side by side, no problem. So that much was really interesting. We got an Arc 172, a nice little Clone Wars era ship brought into. This also had some book characters like Nora Wexley and things like that, which was pretty interesting. Moving forward, we got U-wings from Rogue One, as well as the Striker, the TIE Striker, some more Rebels stuff, and of course more Episode 7 ships being thrown about in here. We also got an Aces pack, sort of, for our from our Episode 7, which was Heroes of the Resistance, which gave us yet another Millennium Falcon, and as well as a Poe Dameron painted T-70. By this point, we started to have a lot of different T-70 pilots, because there'd been 3 different iterations of a T-70 X-Wing, and so it was like, wow, we've got a lot of these. We've got a lot. Then we went on to get some Wookiees, and then, of course, this dual faction, a Skurg bomber, and also our TIE Aggressor, which was the first Imperial ship to have a turret. Then all of a sudden, the arrival of the gunboat made everybody rejoice. That was a very, very cool thing. Then we had the Bullseye arc show up, as well as the Phantom 2. More ships from the sequel trilogy, but these were actually from Episode 8. We had Kylo Ren's TIE Silencer, as well as the Resistance Bomber show up, and this was an interesting one, because at this point the TIE Silencer was like a lot larger than it should have been, and here another example of, hey, let's try and get this stuff from the movie done, and then afterwards they were like, wait, it should not have been this big. They would go on to eventually change that a little bit. Then X-Wing Wave 14. This was the final wave of X-Wing, at least as it existed, because this was around the time they introduced X-Wing 2nd Edition. So this final wave, what it did for X-Wing 1st Edition was it was finally the T65 fix. And what that meant was it was going to have the S-foil cards, and it actually said T65 X-Wing on it. Even though none of the T65 X-Wings indicated that they were T65 X-Wings, they just assumed everybody know that a T65 is different than a T70. But I don't think it was that big of a deal, because this was kind of like the nail in the coffin for X-Wing as it existed. But this also this wave, which was the 2 packs, you had Sauce Partisans, and then of course you had the TIE Reaper. This also brought about cards for X-Wing 2nd Edition, so this was your first look at those 2nd Edition cards. And actually, the funny thing is, they had a lot of changes and reprints. This 2nd Edition felt a little bit forced, because all of the 2nd Edition cards had weird little things about them. Some of them had straight up typos, some of them had symbols where it should have been words, and we saw differences once 2nd Edition came out. But X-Wing 1.0 also had a lot of other little things that weren't exactly ship things, things that we kind of still want to see kind of carried over into 2.0, which was the acrylic bases. You can get alternate colored bases for your ships, which was really cool. They can't really do that so much anymore, though, because once 2nd Edition came out, we were introduced to medium bases, and they didn't make medium bases back when they were doing this, so you can't really have all orange bases if you want now. Also, back in 1st Edition is when they started the maneuver dial upgrade kits, which would eventually continue over into 2nd Edition. So then all of a sudden they did, they kind of teased everybody with a hyperspace event, and they said it was going to talk about all of Star Wars' miniatures games, and everybody tuned in for this amazing live event with Armada players, and everybody else was thinking, what are they going to do? Are they going to reveal any new games? Are they going to talk about this game and that game? And it turned out to be a big bait and switch. It was all the announcement of X-Wing 2nd Edition. This brought a ton of new things into X-Wing, and it basically said, all your old stuff, you're not going to be able to use it anymore, but you can keep the ships, because we're going to reveal conversion kits, so you can upgrade your 1st Edition stuff into 2nd Edition. But this brought about a ton of new changes. One of them is, removal of pilot skill and changing that to initiative. A lot of rules overhaul to try to make things better, an adjustable point system, no points or upgrade slots on cards anymore, and I feel like that was all because of the Punishing One. Granted, it wasn't all because of the Punishing One, but I think that was one of the biggest factors in opening their eyes to, hey, we need a way in live action to be able to nerf ships that are overpowered. And so that's kind of what X-Wing Second Edition is all about. They had an app that was on their website, and as well as a smartphone app that you could download that would have all the points. So you wouldn't be able to actually look at the card and see how many points were there anymore. This also introduced quick builds, which were the little quick build cards that come in all of the black box expansions. Now, this also marks the third core set for X-Wing Second Edition. They also announced that they'd be splitting off the First Order and Resistance into their own factions. So now X-Wing, instead of just having 3 factions, would have 5 factions. However, the core set would still only be X-Wings and an X-Wing and 2 TIE fighters. This also gave us the introduction of movable parts on more ships. Well, we kind of saw that back here with Saw's Partisans, how this X-Wing actually had movable S-foils, although these ones were made kind of poorly and they didn't open and close all the way, whereas once they got to Second Edition, they fixed the material process, and now the S-foils opened and closed quite well. So yeah, lots and lots of changes in X-Wing Second Edition, but you could still keep all of your minis from First Edition if you wanted to. And so we had a lot of things in our launch wave. We had conversion kits, we had an X-Wing and a Y-Wing, just like in the original launch. The Empire kind of got the same treatment, kind of mirroring the original launch. They had promised they were going to do reprints of every single ship that existed in X-Wing. So every ship would eventually get a new box in a 2.0 format. That has not happened yet as of the time of me recording this video. Some of them have, but many of them have not yet. And Scum would also now have its new treatment. And in righting certain wrongs from the First Edition, there were a lot of things that they regretted doing, such as the original HWK having only 1 attack die and things like that. The Slave 1, for example, was no longer going to be an Imperial ship. Now it would be exclusively a Scum and Villainy ship. And the Fang Fighter also had movable parts in this particular version, whereas the original one did not. So those were our 3 conversion kits, but they also did announce 1 brand new ship, yet another Millennium Falcon. From Solo, A Star Wars Story, we got Lando's Millennium Falcon. This one came out pretty early after the movie came out. This was very popular, with removable front section escape pod, which had its own base and functioned as its own ship. This was also released when all of X-Wing 2.0 was first released, and this kind of marked the way of saying, hey, just because we're reprinting a lot of stuff doesn't mean we aren't going to continue to make new stuff. For example, here's something all new. To this day, I believe this is still the only new ship that Scum has gotten. So, sorry, Scum. But yes, then the second wave of X-Wing Second Edition led to the First Order and Resistance eventually getting their own conversion kits, which were a little cheaper because there wasn't as much stuff. These were factions that were pretty bare bones, didn't have a whole lot of anything going on with them. And the First Order kind of got screwed in this case because they only got 1 ship, whereas the Resistance got an all-new ship. Of course, it all depends on how you look at it. I don't play either of those factions mainly, so I didn't really have a horse in that race. But the RZ-2 A-Wing was pretty cool from Episode 8, how it had the front and backwards shooting guns. The T-70 X-Wings now also had movable S-foils and functioned in a lot of ways similar to the T-65. This also gave us a new, I lied, this did give us a new Scum ship, the Pac-Man ship, which is the Mining Guild tie. This is what happens when I just try to ad-lib. I'm like, this is the only new ship. Oh, wait, they got 1 new ship right there. Totally forgot about the Mining Guild tie. I don't think I've ever actually flown it, but this just goes into the thing. Every faction is going to get a TIE fighter eventually. Wave 3 introduced the Clone Wars to X-Wing. So now we had just kind of gotten set up with our 5 factions, and now all of a sudden, now we've got 7 factions. And an interesting thing is they had the Servants of Strife and the Guardians of the Republic boxes, which were kind of like core sets, but they didn't have everything. So it wasn't a full-blown core set. But they wanted to get to a point where they would be selling everything, all the individual components anyway. So like they were going to start making damage decks and movement tools and all of that other stuff. So you wouldn't really need to buy the core set, but at least when this first came out, you still kind of needed to get the core set And even in my what to buy first videos, if you're thinking about getting into the game, those are good starting points. I still suggest getting a core set anyway, because it's just got everything together. And it's pretty good value for what you're getting. And also, if you want to play around with Rebels and Empire, you can still do that. But yeah, so these are good starter kits. You have a reissue kind of the ARC 170 in proper clone format. You've got some Jedis in the Delta 7 Aether sprites. You've got a repaint of the Z95 in there, and then a repaint of some Rogue One ships. We've also got General Grievous and his Belbalub, and some Vulture droids, and Darth Maul in his Scimitar, which is especially cool. I actually really like that particular ship. And then we had yet another Millennium Falcon, although this is actually just a reissue. We start to see a lot more reprints with the successive waves that eventually come out. But yes, we had the reprinted Millennium Falcon, and one of the big things is when they reissued all of these, I did comparisons in all of my unboxings to the original versions. Most of them, just the main image, the main difference was that like the engines were painted in, whereas in first edition X-Wing they didn't have engine glow painted in. But that's one of the only differences. But we had some more reprints. We had the N1 Starfighter. We had the Resistance Transport, which was actually separatable into two different ships. We had the reprinted Silencer at the appropriate size, much smaller, and the B-Wing reissue, which was one of the high points for me because the B-Wing now moved a lot. It now has movable S-foils and a spinning gyroscopic cockpit, which is just awesome. Which is very, very awesome. Although the B-Wing movable S-foils, there wasn't the card for that yet. That card would come later. Next wave, we had the reissued Ghost, which had an improved base, and it has the Phantom 2 in there instead of the Phantom 1, which actually docked in the Ghost now, as opposed to the original X-Wing 1.0 Ghost, whereas the Phantom 1 did not actually come out. It just imaginarily docked. We also had an updated Punishing One. Hopefully this one doesn't have to get nerfed quite so many times. Of course, they have all the digital system in place for that. The Nantex came out, which really shook the world with all its tractor beam shenanigans. That has kind of been one of the more aggressively modified ships to this date. The BTL B Y-Wing, awesome Republic Y-Wing, and then some reissues of more ships. Then we would go on to have a wave that had a lot of changes made to it, with some more reissues. Some stuff from this show, Star Wars Resistance, would show up here. And that was really the Fireball and Major Von Reg's tie. That was really the only new ships here, although Bosk would come out with his reissue of the Houndstooth, and he would actually have a painted up version of his Nashta Pup in there, which was actually kind of cool. So that was likable, but this one was also supposed to have Saw's Partisans and the TIE Reaper in there, which were like reprints of Wave 14 for the original X-Wing. These eventually got pulled and never saw the light of day. Along with the huge ships that were going to be coming out, we also had a huge ship, an epic conversion. This was also supposed to have an Imperial Raider that was supposed to come out that also got pulled and never saw the light of day. Those may eventually show up again, but they were pulled kind of at the last minute. So while if you were Googling stuff, you might see images of like wave 6 for X-Wing, and you'll see like a TIE Reaper in there, and also Saw's Partisans in there. And I was actually really interested to check those out to see if they fixed the wing closing issue, and if they fixed the typos in the cards and everything that came in there compared to their 1.0 versions. And then the Raider, the only real difference it looked like, because I saw it on display at Gen Con, is that they looked like the engines were painted in. But there's still 1.0 versions of that stuff available. But it would have been nice to see them, how they looked with the repainted versions in second edition. And then, of course, the damage decks. There was one for every faction that were finally released. They had been kind of in limbo for a long time. Those eventually came out, as well as a lot of other packs like the Epic Battles pack that came around the same time as the Huge Ship Conversion Kit. And then the Huge Ship Conversion Kit that came out with those huge ships also lets you update all of your huge ships from 1.0 into 2.0. You could run 2 at a time. It had new bases and new cards. Epic Battles allows the wing tool, so now you can fly ships in formation and have one tool that moves like up to 6 of them at once, which is very cool. Some cool scenarios. They also came out with more cardboard packs at this time. They Never Tell Me the Odds, Fully Loaded, and Hot Shots and Aces. Hot Shots and Aces probably being one of the more important ones because it introduces new pilots as well to at least the first 5 factions. The Clone Wars don't really get anything out of here yet, but there's no indication that this is the last cardboard packs that they'll ever make, because they certainly could make more. But those were also nice, fully loaded, having all the bombs and stuff, and Never Tell Me the Odds having all of the asteroids and that sort of stuff, as well as scenarios for each of those, which was pretty fun. Then we get our most recent wave, and that is, includes the first of our Aces packs, which is Heralds of Hope. They did announce at Gen Con that they were going to be doing more and more Aces packs. And the first one would be for the Resistance, but it looks like the rumors are that we're also going to be getting an Empire, a Rebel, and a Scum and Villainy Aces pack in the future. But this also gave us the TIE Brute from Solo: A Star Wars Story, and some more Clone Wars ships, Jango's Slave One, the Droid Tri-Fighter, the Nimbus, which is basically the Nimbus V-Wing, which is just like a TIE fighter for the Republic. Everybody gets a TIE. And then the Eta 2 Actis, which came with a hyperspace dock, which you can use for more casual play and epic play, which is pretty fun. And then, towards the end of 2020, we got the news that Atomic Mass Games will be taking over X-Wing. So that's kind of where we stand right now. So if you are, wherever you happen to jump in the game along the road, hopefully you thought that this was pretty interesting. We really don't know what the future holds for X-Wing, but 2021 will probably be a year that gives us some new information and maybe good things to come. We'll have to wait and see. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you think down in the comments section. Don't forget to check out the links down below. There's links to my Discord as well as merch if you're interested in masks, shirts, socks, any kind of cool Star Wars stuff. It's a great way to help support the channel. You can check out those links down in the description. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Big thanks to my patrons. You guys are amazing. I couldn't do this without your continued support, so thank you so much. And to everybody else, thanks so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.